the Cherokee Nation and a senior at Haskell Indian Nations University. He's originally from Tahlequah, Oklahoma. He's an environmental science major. He moved to Lawrence in 2008, and his focus of study has been botany, mycology, and prairie ecology. He is a former president of Haskell's Wetland Preservation Organization. He is the current vice president of Haskell Native American Church Club, and he lives at the Sunflower House Cooperative here in Lawrence. Sitting next to him is Cleta Labrie. She is a member of the Cherokee Nation and was raised in California. She is currently a sophomore at Haskell. She has a son who graduated from Haskell 2 years ago, and another son who is currently a senior. She is retired from her job at a telephone company and is currently majoring in environmental science at Haskell. And then our last panel member is Mike Karras. Mike started his studies at the University of Southern Maine in 1969 after returning from a tour in Vietnam. He came to Kansas in 1973 and got his bachelor's and MA here at KU in geography. He did 2 years of PhD work at Louisiana State, including both cultural and physical geographic research in the wetlands, and then did an additional 2 years of graduate work back here at KU. He's been working in the corrections since 1987, and he's been the program director for the Douglas County Jail. He's been intimately involved with the struggle to keep KDOT from building the trafficway through the wetlands, and he's been doing research on Haskell and its history for many years. He's given over 100 tours to people in the wetlands. He's guest lectured on this topic. Many of you have probably seen him on panels about this stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by throwing out a few questions, again, focusing on the future of the wetlands, and then we'll let the panel members speak to that, and then hopefully open up some time for your questions or comments on this topic as well. So the first question that I want to pose to people up here is, what is presently, or in the present future, occurring to prevent or to stall the building of the trafficway? What's going on right now?
Some of the recent development that's been going on with the, like last November, we lost the 10th District Appeals court case that we were involved in for quite a while. So the actual legal battle has ended. Right now we're making a stand, trying to propose, some of you may have heard this recently in the news, trying to propose to KU that they give up their 20 acres that they own based on the violation of the quick-claim deed that they gained the land under. So right now that's the avenue we are approaching. The Student Senate is supposed to meet tonight to make a resolution on whether to support, the KU Student Senate is meeting tonight to support the decision to give back the land to Haskell or not, but ultimately it's up to the Chancellor. We're supposed to meet with the Vice Chancellor next week on this issue as well, and have been meeting as a task force through the Student Senate with some Haskell students and some KU students to meet and talk about this, as well as some KU faculty. Most of our efforts right now are focused on awareness and education. Right now, like this Friday, we're having a wetlands teach-in at Haskell at 5 o'clock, and you're all welcome to come. It's just kind of a panel like this, except with some people that are more educated than myself, to teach people, the community, more about the issues that are going on.
They also have a lawyer looking into if this was Indian land, because how is it put, Mike? I'll let Mike talk. He knows everything.
one of the issues about the 20 acres that KU got back in the 1950s is that it and the adjacent 20-acre parcels at what is now Kansas Wildlife Parks and Tourism. It was the Forestry, Fish, and Game Commission back in those days. But those two parcels were acquired specifically with a long series of correspondence that it was needed for education and research on wetlands. And it really has never been used for that purpose since it was acquired. And there's very strong evidence that the money that was used to purchase that land originally for Haskell was monies that were acquired back in the days of allotment when they were selling off Indian reservations and the gas and grazing fees and lumber fees and so on. So it was Indian money that was used to purchase the wetlands in the first place. And therefore, the federal government coming up and giving that land away later on, we think there's a very clear argument that this was a violation of BIA's trust responsibilities to Native Americans. It's got a lot of parallels with the Cobalt lawsuit, where they just traded away a whole lot of money that they were supposed to be watching for Indians. Got back into history pretty quickly.
So it sounds like there's still a few legal avenues available, and then also towards awareness, education, popular support, maybe to influence either KU or the Kansas Biological Wildlife Department that still owns some of the land, potentially to give that back. Seeing what and the chancellor.
Just to be clear, those two 20-acre parcels sit precisely where the South Lawrence Traffic Way and the relocated 31st Street would enter the wetlands. So if KDOT does not have clear title to that land or to the right-of-ways across that land, they simply cannot start firing up bulldozers and building. So that's why those two 20-acre parcels were so critical. We know we're not going to convince Baker University. I mean, they got this land for free, and they're getting $9 million just for the 56 acres that KDOT is taking. So, they're in a position where we're not going to be able to talk them out of it. But KU and the other folks have never used the land for the purposes that they asked for it. And, we think if we can get that back, that it really kills the traffic way going through the wetlands. There's one other element for our future arguments about this being Indian land, because critics keep saying, well, this is federal land, not Indian land, and therefore, it's not the same thing, and it's not a variant of the traffic way. And that's in 1904, Congress passed a law allowing the Secretary of Interior to allow pipelines through any place that he felt that he wanted to at a time when Standard Oil and those folks had incredible power within the Congress. And that 1904 law, which was specifically for putting pipelines across Indian lands, was used to lace the entire wetlands and much of the rest of the Haskell campus with pipelines. It's no longer Standard Oil. It's been broken up and sold off and so on. But basically, that law was used to put pipelines all over the place, and therefore there's a precedent for saying the federal government has already recognized that this is federal land. Indian land, I'm sorry.
And so now that's kind of where the struggle is right now. And as you said, many of these panels have focused on the history, as it's very easy to do, but now we're going to move a little bit into future speculation in terms of, the if this happens or the if this happens. I'd like you to speak a little bit to if the South Lawrence Traffic Way does begin construction. What will that mean? What do we think the wetlands, what will that do to the wetlands? What will it look like? Part of the argument for proponents of the traffic way are that they're restoring or building additional wetlands. why it is that maybe not exactly what we would hope, or does not equal the ones that are being taken.
One of the problems with destroying this wetland is it's been here forever. Creator made this wetland. They want to make a new wetland, which isn't going to have the same soil. You're not going to be able to, you won't have the same plants. They say, you know, this is a learning opportunity for us students at Haskell. We can learn how to build a wetland. We can't do what Creator has done. And there is no way we can make this wetland, the new one, even come close to equaling what we already have. We will lose so much. Not just with our education, because Haskell uses the wetlands for education. We used 4,700 credit hours last year for our college. We get a lot of assistance with like the HERS program, Teacup program, these summer internships. That helps our college to continue because our budget has been cut so many times. So not only will it hurt our school and us as an Indian people, because we won't have the same quality of education where we can go out there. We still collect medicine out there. We won't be able to collect our medicine. There are, I know this is history, there are children in the wetlands, and we will be just disturbing the children. So in the future, without our wetlands, I mean, that's such a spiritual place for us. And you can't make a new spiritual place. That's like taking down the Sistine Chapel. You know, I mean, for us, this is very spiritual. So what it will be like in the future, I don't know, but it's not going to be anything close to what Creator has made.
I have a little bit different perspective, because even if Roger Boyd University were successful in making the wetlands to the east and to the west, the mitigation wetlands, 100% as good in terms of the plant life and so on there. And they have gathered a lot of seeds from natural wetlands and hand scattered them and so on. And, you know, there's been some real progress in getting that built. However, no matter how well those wetlands, mitigation wetlands do, you're still looking at an enormous behemoth of traffic. You are talking about initially 4 lanes of the South Lawrence traffic way itself, and then 4 more lanes of a relocated 31st Street that's right beside it, and 46 feet between the east lanes and the west lanes of the traffic way, so that in the future it can be expanded to 6 lanes. So we are talking about 10 lanes of traffic through the north end of the wetlands. Through the area up towards the Wakarusa River is the highest land. That's where the sediments drop and the land builds up the highest. And then as you head north down towards 31st Street is the lowest part. That's the wettest part. That is the heart of the wetlands. That's the way wetlands naturally develop. But these 8 to 10 lanes are not simply going to have Lawrence commuter traffic in the future. What they will have is their infrastructure these days, not in the early days of building the traffic way, but these days it is primarily infrastructure for these giant dreams of turning this part of America into the hub for NAFTA.
For what?
For NAFTA, for all the goods coming in, not only from Mexico, but from Asia. There is right now development of all sorts of regional distribution centers in Ottawa. That's their vision of their future, is that they're going to develop all these regional distribution centers. And that is an important part of why Highway 59 was pushed in there. Then you've got the old naval station that's in what they now call New Century, Kansas, and it is I-35 for all the goods that are being brought up by truck to that center, and then it would be distributed all over the United States. That's being developed as a NAFTA hub for goods coming out of Mexico on trucks. And then you've got another closed military base, which is Cabarra in the south part of Kansas City. And folks have gotten rights to 5 different railroads that go from the Pacific coast of Mexico, north of Acapulco, all the way up to Kansas City. So with improvements on those railroads, they can bring goods all the way from a port on the Pacific coast in Mexico, which can compete with Long Beach in California, which is the primary place where goods come in from all over Asia. So this is talking about having an alternative deep water port in Mexico where there are fewer regulations and so on, and where they can bring all those goods from Asia up through Mexico and on the railroads up to Kansas City to be distributed. So we're talking about 3 different future planned major trucking centers that would be in this immediate area. And that's why it is important to folks that go way beyond the movers and shakers in Lawrence to have infrastructure tying all this stuff together. And most of those folks could give a damn whether the road goes through the wetlands or south of the river. But they have been convinced by our local folks here that that is the fastest way to get it done. And so you've got all that power that's pressing the federal government and so on to get the road on in. Let me finish one more thing here. If you get that kind of truck traffic going through, for the most part, the way trucking companies work, they are not going to compete with the commuters that are going back and forth between Johnson County and Lawrence and Topeka and so on. They primarily schedule their trucks to be hitting Lawrence, Kansas in the evening when the commuters are out of the way. That puts incredible amounts of trucking coming through the wetlands at night. And if you study the natural wildlife of wetlands, you'll find that most of it is nocturnally dominant. That means that when truck traffic is going through there at night, it is really, really impacting the life cycles of many, many of the creatures that exist in the wetlands. And you've got light pollution, you've got noise pollution, you've got air pollution, you've got water pollution, and the one that people keep forgetting about is that not the sound, but the actual rumble of the trucks, what I call the earth-shaking pollution, is probably one of the biggest impacts on the wildlife of the wetlands. And any of you that have been out on a major highway at night where there were a lot of trucks coming by, it's not only the noise and the smell of the trucks, but that rumbling of the trucks. And that won't chase everything out of the wetlands. There are always critters that can tolerate almost anything. And we have our rats and our pigeons and our cockroaches in the city, but when you get out to the edges, most everybody in Lawrence knows that there are lots of foxes in town, there are lots of rabbits in town, there are lots of possums and so on. There are going to be animals that continue to exist out there. You'll see some turtles, you'll see some frogs, but that is an incredibly biodiverse area right now. And with that kind of impact, I'll guarantee you that the biodiversity is going to be negatively affected. There's also going to be a tremendous negative impact on Haskell. I've been out there many times to events that go on at night at the Medicine Wheel, and there's sweat lodges out there. Those are very, very often night effects. And there's just so much happening at Haskell now in getting back to native ways of looking at science and math and so on. And as that grows, the night sky has become more and more important to native ways of learning. And there's no place in Douglas County, anywhere near the city, where you can go out and see the stars the way you can out in that area. There's no lights nearby. That sky is getting to be a more and more important part of Haskell's future classes and so on.
Yeah, as far as the the impact doesn't only affect the wildlife, it also affects us as students a lot because we have like multiple ceremonies that occur overnight. Like Mike was saying, like in Native American church, we have like it goes all night long, and it's already at the south end edge of campus, which is closest to the road because it's the only place we're allowed to have it. So you already experience noise pollution. You already experience that earth shaking feeling. You already experience the smell. I mean, half the time you walk around campus, it smells like shit because we're right next to the city's waste facility. You know, like go ahead and throw smog and all these other added pollutions into an area that otherwise appears beautiful but really is toxic debris. And as far as like access to the wetlands, like right now I can go and ride my bike and be there in 5 minutes, like in my backyard. And, if there's a giant sound barrier and a 6-lane highway, I can't do that. And they say that Haskell has our own portion of the wetlands. Most of that is not very wet. It's like mostly like forest, or like it's been dry for so long in the past decade or so. A lot of trees have grown up in the area that at one time was wetlands. So Haskell supposedly owns 370 acres of wetlands, I think, but a very small portion of it is wetlands. It's just Haskell property, but it's like dubbed as being part of this, but it's not really. It's just that little strip next to 31st Street that Mike was mentioning earlier. That's actually the wettest area, which last year was actually, like, it got quite dry. It was one of the driest years I've ever, like in my 4 or 5 years here, it's the driest I've ever seen it. But yeah, so to actually experience the wetlands, you have to go to the Baker side. You have to go in there if you actually want to be in it, if that makes sense. So this wall, this sound barrier, this highway, all this thing is pretty much blocking me off as a student, and as other Haskell students blocking us off, and that's making it much more dangerous to even try to experience, go on a hike. Like I already have to like run across 31st Street, which is not exactly fun sometimes. But yeah, that's all.
Thanks. Well, maybe we'll just do one more question for the panelists and then open it up to questions or comments. And this question is going to kind of be the flip side of what we just talked about. I think you guys have done a really nice job of pointing out the multiple aspects that are involved in this complex situation, culturally, educationally, ecologically, economically. And so I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to if we are successful in preventing the construction of the traffic way, what would that symbolize, or what would that represent in terms of maybe community activist movements? What could come out of this that would maybe help prevent future SLTs around the country or around the world? Or what would this mean in terms of changing the narrative of what we think of as economic progress? Or what would this mean educationally for Haskell and potentially KU and Baker if it's not built? So speak a little bit to the hopefulness of if it's not built.
This past spring, I went on the ECM Alternative Spring Break to Appalachia to do some work with some communities that have been impacted by mountaintop coal removal. And when we were reading through some of the papers about the court case that was occurring there, it talked about they were mitigating wetlands in Tennessee and in Kentucky, and I thought that was really ironic that I happened to stumble across this, and I was like, wow, that really hit me home, because it reminded me of this issue. And that's just a small example. And wetlands have been attempted to be mitigated before. It's not something that is uncommon to just like, oh, we're gonna replace this biodiverse area. And this whole idea of viewing nature as a resource, as opposed to as opposed to nature as a landscape. We view it as an area that can be extracted. Something has to be extracted of it, otherwise it's not valuable. This is the view that KDOT is approaching on it, and this is the view that often our society approaches when looking at land and land management. And I think that's we could help set a precedent.
In the future, if this comes together, I can see it being The Cherokees have a word. I am Chalagi, and it's called Gadugi. It means come together as a community. It's a very simple word, but with this SLT behind us and it's moved away, I think one thing we can say is that this has brought our community together. We'd like to see more community come out, but it is bringing, we work closely with KU Environs, with the Eco-Justice, and I don't think we would have had that opportunity had this not come up. And so what I would really like to see is for Baker to become involved with us. Mike proposed a project and was basically told, get lost. And those are the nice words. So, you know, what I'm hoping is that we could continue with the relationship and just educate the public even more. But just with what the wetlands has to offer, I don't think a lot of people understand, and we don't want to lose that. And if it stays, if you haven't been there, you really need to come out. It is absolutely gorgeous. And we're going to say, come on out, because we're going to believe it's still going to be there.
If somehow miracles happen and we manage to get the SLT to just evaporate or to move south of the river, there's still 31st Street there, and I don't foresee any way that right-of-way, 31st Street is on Haskell land. Not everyone realizes that. But 31st Street is on Haskell land. Haskell land continues up essentially to where the canal is that runs parallel to it to the south. To the south. That road is there. Lawrence does feel very strongly, the administrators of this city feel very, very strongly that there is a need for an east-west arterial south of 23rd Street. And that road, 31st Street, if it were, I hate to use the word improved, but I'll bite my tongue and say, if that road were improved in a way that allowed it to function as a true arterial, the plans are already on the board to extend 31st Street all the way to Highway 10. And, that's not on Haskell land at all and never was federal or Haskell land. So I don't see any way that that's going to stop. There's going to be that continuation. But if that road were developed, 31st Street, with what the environmental scientists call toad tunnels, it's not really for toads to get across the road, but for any of the small critters. And then bear bridges, another term that doesn't really mean bears, but natural ways that deer and larger animals, coyotes and so on, can get across above, and human beings, and Robbie on his bike, that would be something that could become a true laboratory for all three universities, University of Kansas, Baker University, and Haskell Indian Nations University, to really, really work on long-term studies of how you attract different kinds of animals to go through various designs of toad tunnels, how you effectively get things like coyotes and bobcats and deer to actually go across these bridges. You can't do that on a 10-lane highway. There's no way they're going to put tunnels underneath this behemoth that we're talking about. But a slightly enlarged 31st Street, it's possible. And the three universities working together, you've got a private religious-based university, a major research state university, and a federally funded Indian university. There are so many different options there for garnering financial support to do that kind of stuff. We could have something that was a very, very positive sense of the road being part of the educational process at all 3 universities. And that would be so healing, so much more positive for the way this thing moves on into the future. Instead of, if this road is built, it's going to be just like when the Black Hills were taken after they were promised to natives in treaties, and then we discovered gold there and said, the hell with the treaties, we're taking it anyway, and year after year they've offered to pay, and the natives have said, no way, we're going to get those back. This is the kind of thing, Haskell was offered a lot of money and turned it down, and that's when they moved the road into the portion that Baker now owns, because they could buy off Baker, they couldn't buy off Haskell, and Haskell's never going to give on this. If the road is built, it's going to be a scar on this community deep into the future.
Well, I'd like to thank our panel members again, Robbie, Cleta, and Mike, for speaking to some of these questions. And then now I would like to open it up to questions or comments from you guys in attendance. We have about 20 minutes, I think, for a response. Here and then here.
I've been in Lawrence since 1976, pretty much watching the cycle and cycle and cycle, and it's very discouraging. I was very active in fighting the 59 highway because I knew it was just a big lead-in for the South Lawrence traffic way pushing through the wetlands. What are our odds? I mean, do you guys have any idea? Are we just beating our heads against the wall?
I'm going to repeat a little bit of her question for people who couldn't hear, and then let the panelists speak to it. So she's been in Lawrence for some time and following and a part of this struggle, and is wondering what our odds are to prevent the construction. And are we just beating our heads, or do we have some odds to prevent this?
Well, legally, we probably don't have great odds. But spiritually, I think it takes a lot of prayer. I think that we have to come together as a community. If you guys get involved, if you can talk to your representative still, it's not too late. The bulldozers have not started. They've marked where they want it to go, but it hasn't started yet. I mean, so there's still hope. I guess, I don't know if we have odds, but we have hope.
What are the future plans?
I'd like to respond to her first, please. Thanks.
Yes, sir.
I've got, her question, and then yours. But in terms of what the odds are, I'm a realist. I know that without another round of litigation, there's no chance of stopping the bulldozers in the late summer or fall. They guarantee they'll turn those bulldozers on when there are the fewest number of Haskell and KU students around. Everything they've done in the last 20 years, they always time the hearings and everything else to minimize the number of opponents that are going to show up. I suspect those bulldozers do get turned on, that there's, I work at the jail. I am not going to get arrested, but I know that there are going to be people out there getting arrested when it happens. I'll try to have good programs when they come in.
Thank you, Mike.
But I do think that if we can find there isn't that much to be done to determine whether a lawsuit, in fact, can work. We have to determine whether or not there's a statute of limitations, and with the COBOL case, I think most of that has already been decided legally in our favor. But it does have to be investigated if there are special situations with this. And it has to be determined whether or not Indian money, in fact, was used to purchase the wetlands. And I think, again, the odds are very, very good that the documentation is there unless they specifically went to Congress and asked for money to purchase the wetlands. And I I haven't been able to find it, and I don't believe it exists, then it was Indian money that was used to purchase the wetlands. So, that being the case, I think we've got a very, very strong argument. So, you know, I'm a realist, but I'm also a blind optimist. You know, I try to balance the two.
I think there was another question back here, and then maybe up front.
Looking forward to the future, we've got a local emergency planning commission that has not, to my knowledge, addressed any hazardous material spills on the proposed thruway. I've had correspondence with project management of KDOT. So, under federal regulations called SARA Title III or Emergency Preparedness Committee Right to Know Act by EPA, we basically have another violation, pending violation of federal regulations. So my question is, how could that fact be used to reinforce your case to relocate the traffic way south of the Wakarusa?
Okay, so just to say that a little louder so people can hear it, that there may be avenues for waste or spillage in terms of legal avenues along those lines. So I'll turn that over to Mike.
Let me do that with a quick scenario. If, as we look at the truck traffic at night going along, one of the loads happens to be carrying anhydrous ammonia. That will result in a requirement to evacuate a lot of people from the Haskell campus in South Lawrence that I'm pretty sure we're not prepared to do. If, in fact, the chemical that's spilled from one of these commercial carrier trucks happens to carry something that's caustic to the wetlands and it seeps in, again, we have something similar to the oil leaks around Little Rock that we haven't been prepared to cope with.
Yeah, in that regard, the roadway, I put the green papers up here or a couple of maps of the wetlands. You can grab them on your way out. But you'll see if this road is built the way the 32nd Street plan calls for, there's a nice big curve as it goes out to the bridge to nowhere, you know, that bridge across Iowa Street. And this spot, it was foggy this morning. If you went out there, you would discover that this is one of the foggiest places anywhere in Douglas County. That's why the wetland is there in the first place, is because it's an incredibly low area. So we're talking about a lot of fog, trucks, commuter traffic, and a curve. So you have an accident there. And what is the wind direction? The wind direction is right towards Haskell. It's right towards Broken Arrow School. It's right towards South Junior High, Lawrence High, Prairie School. There's lots and lots of schools that are downwind. Lately, they've been rebranding the highway construction. Highway folks, instead of talking about the smart highway, which is the term they used for the road between Johnson County and Topeka, they're now starting to brand all of this as the animal health highway, because of all those billions of dollars that is supposed to be going into Manhattan to build this new place to prevent foot and mouth disease and all kinds of bioterrorism against our agriculture. So we're talking about not only a lot of nasty stuff being moved from Plum Island in New York to Manhattan across this area, but also you've got nuclear power plants all over the east that have been accumulating their nuclear waste, waiting for the federal government to build a place where it can be stored. And where are they going to store it? On Indian land, of course, at Yucca Mountain. And Yucca Mountain is part of the west of us. So we can look forward to lots of nuclear waste coming through this area as well. So the things you're talking about are not just abstract that 1 in every 3 commercial trucks carry some kind of hazardous waste, but we're talking about real hazardous waste coming through this area.
Do you have a question?
Well, I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but when I was growing up, we did a lot of travel and we slept on the trains because we had a very good railway system which could function in every kind of weather you could imagine. Passengers, freight, why is, I mean, you might talking about getting to the moon or something. Why don't we just go right out here, and what we always had in the past, my grandparents used it to go to Florida in the winter. We used it to get to Canada or to Colorado for some other thing. And it was rail service. And I haven't heard anybody even mention it. It's safe. You can do it at night. You can do it in all kinds of weather. I know because we did it. You know, we go from Cleveland to suburban Cleveland to Florida, and after Christmas time, and we slept on the train, had breakfast in the morning, and.
I love trains. You got a question? I can respond.
Well, what I say is rail service is you can talk about going to the moon, but you can't talk about going to rail service from here to Los Angeles.
Well, I feel like that kind of speaks to that, maybe the idea that this, the SLT is looking at kind of progress in terms of reliance on automobiles or on trucks as opposed to rail service, right? And that brings up the question of, is that sort of infrastructure sustainable, right? Like, are we going to be able to continue to sustain traffic through autos and trucks as opposed to thinking of other things like railroad?
I don't know. I've been here a long time too, and I'm part of this fight. And it seems to be that the reality is that the powers that be and the money that be are almost overwhelming. The horror stories are interesting, but I've heard them all before. What I'm really interested in is if the trafficway goes through, I mean, and can't be stopped, how do we put a positive, healthy look on what's there, what remains, and how to use that in a way that is educational, useful, whatever, and gets us out of the battle. Because as far as I'm concerned, the battle's over. And so my issue is, how do we stop repeating all the horror stories and talk about what's left, and how do we make that richer, more useful, whatever.
Okay. Yeah, just to repeat that a little bit. So if the trafficway does go through, how can we position it or frame it? What remains? What is the positive that can come out of the so I'll turn that over to.
I think you make a really good point, sir. Because legally, you're right, the battle is technically over, and being optimistic like that is the best way to win. I think is a really great way to look at it. I think one of the things that we can learn the most about this is like the creation, like what Mike was saying, the creation of like an area, like teaching students and using this as an area for actual research to actually introduce. How do you reintroduce a native habitat in an area that you know, however many hundreds of years ago? Because hundreds of years ago, these surrounding areas were wetlands. So it's a really interesting experiment of, can you destroy something and attempt to recreate it? You know, we say no, and you know, the evidence doesn't prove it very strongly that it will, at least in the way that we would like it to. But I think that since it's, you know, I think if we don't have any other option, I say that we try. We try to make the best out of it. We try to utilize and learn and research and, you know, have lots of good information about this, and, you know, teach people in the future of like, oh, in case evil corporations want to destroy this habitat, at least we have the ability to recreate it somewhere else, which I think would be amazing.
Over the years, I've had contact with elders and folks from various parts of Indian country where things as bad as the completed SLT have happened to their sacred sites all over this country. It's nothing new. We've been screwing over Indians and their sacred places time and time and time again. And one of the things that they have said to me is that even if the trafficway is built, it doesn't mean that that area stops being sacred. It is still going to be an incredibly important part of Haskell's history, and the sense of sacredness is going to be there for many, many people who have attended Haskell in the past and who attended in the future. So I can't answer your question. If it is built, it's an abomination, and I am going to be in despair for a long time. But it doesn't mean that it stops being sacred. It's the heart and soul of Haskell, as far as many, many people that have gone there over the years, and there's about 150 tribes, 130 to 150 tribes represented every semester. There's of the 566 recognized tribes, and the many that had their federal recognition taken away during the Eisenhower administration, whether they're officially considered Indians by the federal government or not. There's a hell of a lot of people out there that are going to be very, very saddened at the road going in, but it's not going to stop that place from being sacred.
Well, and I think your question speaks to an important point about that if it does go through, there needs to be a way to think about how do we honor the successes of the past 20 plus years by the members of this community, many in this room, who've been really dedicated and passionate working to prevent this, and that there needs to be some way to begin a healing process and to focus on what can come out of that. And as Mike said, many people would obviously be very despaired for quite some time, but if we can start to think about ways to honor that and think about it in terms of what can come out of it, I think would be something useful.
Our church, Plymouth Congregational Church, through the Eastertide, we've been invited to have a church-wide read of the book, The Nature Principle by Richard Louvre, L-O-U-V, and I understand as of this today that he had spoken at the Lawrence Arts Center earlier, and I wish I'd have plugged in then. But I'm about 140 pages into this book, and I think somewhere about 120 pages in, he's talking about communities in the United Kingdom and a few in America who are preparing essentially for the post-petroleum age, and they are creating magnificent, ecologically sound communities and restructuring and replanning how to live in a post-petroleum age, and it's very encouraging. I mean, the man's a visionary, and I think of all the communities in the whole state of Kansas, that Lawrence, with all this practice trying to preserve something, that we could join that movement. And I can't think of a term. There's two terms, and I can't think of them right now. Forgive my fossil brain, but by gum, that book is really stirring. I mean, it is worth the read. It is really a good book, and it's got me thinking about all kinds of great experiences I've had in my life in Mother Nature, and it just lifts you, and it gives you hope and a vision. And we need vision in this country, do we not? Man.
Amen.
And for those who didn't get that, if you want to write that down, Richard Love,
L-U-V.
L-U.
And he's a University of Kansas graduate, I think I understand.
The Nature Principle, so we should all read that book.
What's the title again?
The Nature Principle?
Yes, Nature Principle. And it's for sale at Raven Bookstore for one place.
And his earlier book was No Child, The Last Child in the Woods.
And was that the international bestseller?
Yes.
So that's the quality of the writing.
About 10 years.
Wonderful book.
Questions?
Will you talk a little more about the sewer and the smell that you referred to in the wetlands?
I was more specifically referring to the smell on...
Repeat the question.
She asked that you speak a little bit more to the sewer and the smell that Robbie alluded to about around the wetlands and on Haskell campus.
I was referring to the smell on Haskell campus that due to our proximity to Lawrence's waste management facility, it's located right on the east side, the southeast side of campus, less than a mile from some of the school buildings and our community garden that we have there, and I'm out there frequently, and I often, it smells like, not good. I don't know. I don't want to be impolite.
It smells like crap. Because sometimes when the rain is really bad, there really is. And so, they're trying to get it, a larger one built now?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So, it's really bad. Really bad.
This isn't actually a treatment facility. What it is a lift station. It's directly in front of the Haskell Cemetery, which has over 100 children buried in it. But this lift station that was built in the 70s is directly in front of the Haskell Cemetery. And it is to bring the sewage up over the higher land to get to East Lawrence where it's actually treated. But the Haskell campus, I've got maps of the sewer lines that go all through the campus. And it's bringing the sewage from all over the development of the west side of the city. Everything drains downhill from Wakarusa Drive and on. It all drains downhill towards the Wakarusa Valley and is pumped across the Haskell campus to this lift station and then goes uphill to East Lawrence. And that lift station, time and time again, the city says, oh, it doesn't smell. And any of you that come out to that cemetery, if you don't think it smells, get your nose checked.
I think we have time for one more question or comment.
So I want to ask this is something that's bothered me throughout this whole thing. There's always references to children being buried, but no specific evidence about that. There's no actual evidence of a burial. There may be oral tradition, there may be stories, but I'm talking about something a little harder. I would think if actual data that would support that were to exist, the fight would have been a very different fight.
He has asked about the children that are buried in the wetlands as a part of the history of the Indian boarding school, and I think Cleta will speak to this.
There are children in the wetlands. They've had ceremonies for a few. The elders have come out, and they chose to let them stay there, so they did ceremonies.
But did they find actual evidence of the burial? I understand the ceremonies, and
No, they found children. They found remains. And the elders came out, and they did ceremonies, and they left the children there. So we know, without a shadow of doubt, there are children in the wetlands.
I'm surprised that wasn't a more provocative argument than legally.
Would you like it if we published an extremely sensitive topic that is, really upsetting? If this information was more public, would it make it any more true to you?
No, I'm talking about its impact legally in the courts.
Oh, no, none whatsoever. They've found remains elsewhere, and all they do is pick them up and move them and build right over it.
So legally, it gets ignored.
Exactly.
You have to stop construction long enough to move the graves, but then you build.
Yeah.
Well, and I think they speak a little bit to the different kinds of evidence that we value, which comes out of often in terms of environmental injustice fights, right? Like the difference between maybe experiential or oral or narrative evidence versus what seems to be privileged a lot in terms of like hard scientific fact, so to speak. And I think particularly in fights like this, we got to consider all types of evidence for these types of injustices. Well, again, I would like to thank you all for coming and for your wonderful comments and questions and attentiveness, and thank our panel, and thank you to SAD for organizing this. I think he might have a couple of announcements before we finish up.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you very much, Mike. You got to go. I just want you all to pick up, if you will, this. We have a very distinguished person coming in 2 weeks, Larry Rasmussen, and he's going to speak to this very thing that we're talking about. It's not the comfortable presentations he's going to make. It's going to be some along, we've got to change our ways radically, and we need to look at a different vision of who we might become, but he's going to be here, and I want to hand these out, and I hope you all will participate as much as you can. Thank you again, all of you.